Everyone, my name is Ryan Filtz. This is John Kurtz. We did a project with the Eagle County Community Wildlife Roundtable where we developed, implemented, and will eventually analyze a survey measuring a few themes that we will talk about in our project. We like to do something that I call the pull over plunge approach, where we just grit our teeth and jump right in. So don't expect a table of contents when I click this.
Hi, everyone. Just to give a brief background of who we are. I'm John Kurtz, for those of you who don't know me. And before coming to the Conservation Leadership Master's Program, I was involved in the nonprofit conservation world, implementing and coordinating a lot of different conservation core projects. And then before that, I was studying geography and Spanish in Denver. And what really interested me in coming to this program and eventually partnering with Mike Kurtz for this Capstone project was learning more about how and why policies and big conservation decisions were created. I've had a lot of experience with implementing conservation projects on the ground, but I haven't had a lot of experience with the policies and the planning behind everything. So it's been a really great experience to work with Mike and the roundtable to learn more about why decisions are made and the research going behind those decisions. So with that, turn it over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, John. So like I said, my name is Ryan Filtz. I have absolutely no experience with social science or policy or anything like that before this program. I worked for 5 years in the National Park Service and law enforcement. So I came into this program with pretty much a clean slate, but a desire to expand my horizons and eventually get in a different career path through this program. We would also like to introduce our Capstone partner who is in the room right now, Mike Kurtz. He's got a PhD. He's in the Human Dimensions Specialist Researcher for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. He is their premier social scientist, and he has been an absolute wonderful person to work with throughout this entire project. Okay. So, like I said, jumping right into it. So, our Capstone partner was Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but the project we actually did was collaborating with an organization called the Eagle County Community Wildlife Roundtable. So, just a quick background, Eagle County Community Wildlife Roundtable is a collaborative body of many diverse groups and people, and that is located in Eagle County, Colorado. I'm going to start off with basically about like why they form, and then we'll go into who they are and further from there. So in an unspecified time before February 2020, a small group of decision makers and wildlife enthusiasts got together for a cup of coffee. While wildlife was not the reason for their gathering, conversation eventually turned to that topic. It was clear to these folks that the wildlife of Eagle County were facing serious problems. Populations were declining. An uptick in development had led to loss of wildlife habitat. There was a surge in human-wildlife conflict as outdoor recreation opportunities expanded, and predators were becoming more and more prevalent on agricultural lands and even in urban areas. From this small cadre and their discussion sprung the idea for a collaborative body solely dedicated to advocating for wildlife in Eagle County. That idea came into reality in February 2020, when representatives from municipal governments, state and federal agencies, nonprofits, and private businesses officially founded the Eagle County Community Wildlife Roundtable. The need for such a collaborative had never been greater. For an assessment conducted prior to the formal establishment of the roundtable, found that members of Eagle County communities not only shared the same concerns about wildlife, but were also eager for solutions. And so the roundtable set out on their mission to identify the issues facing wildlife and to provide their communities with sound, science-backed strategies to minimize further harm to their fur-covered and feathered neighbors. So, who exactly is on the roundtable? Quite a few people. The roundtable has about 15 members sitting on it from a variety of different interest groups. They include municipal governments such as the town of Vail and town of Minturn, federal and state land management agencies such as Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the U.S. Forest Service, nonprofits such as the Eagle Valley Land Trust and the Eagle Valley Community Foundation, and private businesses such as Bull Basin and the Red Mountain Group. In addition to all of these folks that represent their organizations on the table, there are also independent civilians that participate. They come from backgrounds such as ranching, outdoor enthusiasts, and just generally concerned citizens.
With so many diverse interests on the roundtable, it's very essential for the success of the roundtable to have a solid organization and vision on how they function. So at the core, there is the roundtable itself, which meets about once every month. And then to really break that down, they've created about 4 subcommittees. Those 4 subcommittees are the Land Use Planning Committee, the Education and Outreach Committee, the Wildlife Habitat Management Committee, and the Recreation Committee. And the committees can also serve as a touching points to reach out with the greater community in Eagle County with business owners, scientists, and volunteers, et cetera. For example, the Education Outreach Committee does a lot of articles in the Vail Daily, which is a local newspaper in Eagle County. It should be mentioned that there is no one executive director or final decision maker on the roundtable. However, there is a National Forest Foundation facilitator who really keeps the committees on task and really organizes all of the happenings within the roundtable. I think it's really important to note that one of the great successes of the roundtable is that they have a collaborative action plan. So while there are no official governing documents, there is a decision-making criteria documents which guide the decisions that the roundtable makes based on consensus. And those decision-making criteria, there's really 5 points to them. They ask, when making decision, does it align with the purpose of the roundtable? Is it realistic and implementable? Is it supported by the diverse stakeholders of the roundtable? Is it supported by the broader community in Eagle County? And will it lead to positive action? And these really help provide focus for aligning all the diverse interests and partnerships in the roundtable, coming together and making decisions.
There you go. So what are some of the activities and projects that the roundtable has done in the past and is currently working on? Well, 3 big ones we want to point out are first, the Community Wildlife Roundtable Interactive Map Viewer, which was published in May 2021. This tool allows policymakers and your average citizen to log on. And as you can see from the slide, there are a variety of different layers that you can add to it, which include things like specific species migration corridors, winter range, and general ranges. As you can see, I have selected here the bighorn winter and elk winter kind of ranges. And those are delineated by those kind of blue splotches with the stripes on them. It's a really useful tool and one the roundtable hopes policymakers will be able to use in the future when deciding where their next land use project is going to be. Another thing that the roundtable gets involved in is something more of an advisory capacity. So several times now they have provided feedback for Colorado Parks and Wildlife Management plans. Back in the past, they've done one for the mule deer herd management plan, and currently they're providing feedback for a black bear management plan. And the third thing that they are pretty active with comes from the Education and Outreach Committee, and that is the consistent and regular publication of educational articles in the Vail Daily and other resources. These articles cover anything from species-specific kind of facts and educational materials to ways that people can minimize human-wildlife conflict in Eagle County.
To give a little backstory about how we got involved and specifically why we worked on the survey. Basically, the roundtable was realizing, specifically the Land Use Plan Committee, that there was a social science data gap in how Eagle County residents view increasing land development conflicts with wildlife habitat conservation. And within the Land Use Planning Committee, Devin Duvall, who's a district wildlife manager, reached out to Mike. And the Land Use Planning Committee really wanted to know, how do you create a robust survey and how do you really go about having robust social science methods? And so they got to talking and Mike invited Ryan and I onto the project, and the Capstone project is initiated. And also it's important to note that one of the goals of the Land Use Plan Committee for 2021 was to design and implement a survey. And that's kind of where we came in. So yeah, why specifically a survey? Within the roundtable's objectives for making decisions, they really want to act in the interest of Eagle County residents. And it's really important to have good social science data to make those decisions, as well as having that data for other county land use decision makers to make those land use decisions. So it really serves as a pulse of the public when it comes to discerning what's important to them regarding wildlife habitat conservation and land development and outdoor recreation opportunities within the county.
So now we're going to give you a little description of our project site, which is Eagle County, Colorado. So Eagle County, Colorado is located in about central to northwest part of Colorado. It sits in an elevation of 6,000 to 14,000 feet, and it has a wide variety of ecosystems, from rangeland to subalpine to alpine and riparian habitats. Due to all that different variety in habitat, you can imagine there are a ton of different mammal species there. There's over 135 actually. That includes species such as bighorn sheep, elk, moose, black bear, lynx. Pretty much anything you can think of that would thrive in an alpine habitat in Colorado, you can find in Eagle County. Now, the total area of Eagle County is about 1,082,740 acres total. That land distribution, as you can see from this diagram, is slants very, very heavily into the federal agency control. Between the Forest Service and the BLM, they own about 78.4% of Eagle County land. 20% of Eagle County land is in private use, 1% is in state use, and 0.3% belongs to either the municipalities of Eagle County, the county itself, or other entities within the county. This is why a project like this is so important, because the county owns such a small portion of the open space in Eagle County. They really need to make sure that when they're making decisions on how to utilize that land, it lines up with the constituents in the county. I'll give you a little background on the population and demographics. So the population of Eagle County, according to the 2019 census, is 55,127 people. As you can see from our graph here, the demographic leans very heavily in as white people. There's only a small percentage of other ethnicities within Eagle County, but because the census differentiates between demographics and people of Hispanic origin, we made a separate diagram showing that there are about 31% of the people in Eagle County identify as either Hispanic or Latino. This is another important consideration this is another important fact we had to take into consideration when developing our project, because about 7.2% of that population identifies as not being able to speak English well or at all, according to the American Community Survey. Just a few more facts about Eagle County. The median household income is about $84,970, and the education levels are a high school degree or higher, about 80% of the population, and a bachelor's or graduate degree, about 49% of the population. So a lot of people are high school educated, and then a good portion of them are also educated at a bachelor's level.
So in order to start developing a survey, it was really important to get everyone on the same page about what people wanted out of this survey. And so that, with Mike's guidance and input from the Land Use Plan Committee, we created a scope of work to establish common survey objectives and begin to address the logistics of implementing a survey on this county level scale. We had frequent communication with the Land Use Plan Committee, and we also used the scope of work to eventually apply for grants and give a concise overview to interested stakeholders in the survey.
So the first thing we did before we got into any of kind of like the development of the survey was we had to lay the foundation. And in order to do that, we conducted a literature review. And we based our literature review, we were looking for themes that we thought aligned with these 4 objectives that we identified in the scope of work we produced prior to this with the Land Use Committee. So, these were the 7 themes we ended up pulling from those 4 objectives, and these were the 7 themes we looked for in our literature review. We searched for literature that had anything to do with wildlife values, anything that looked at land use or management preferences when it came to land, anything that had to do with outdoor recreation, just anything that had to do with any of these 7 themes. We looked at it, we assessed it if it would be useful for our project, and we either added it to a document we had compiled with all the literature on it, or we tossed it to the side. Now, once we had the literature review up and going, we also started looking at surveys, because that is what we were developing. So we were looking at surveys that kind of match not only these themes, but also county level, state level, surveys that matched the kind of organizations we were working with. And the information we pulled from those went on a different document.
And that document was a survey matrix. And so we built out the survey matrix looking at close to 50 surveys related to the potential survey themes we wanted to incorporate with our questionnaire. And with further collaboration with the Land Use Plan Committee, we realized we wanted to focus more on wildlife values, wildlife attitudes, outdoor recreation, land development preferences, and quality of life. So we really broke down the surveys in terms of what the general theme was, if there was a sub-theme, and then we included the question if we thought it would be relatable to the questionnaire we'd eventually build out. And then we also noted the scale and if there were any additional notes about the methods or anything that was of note. And so we eventually realized that the survey couldn't address all the themes and still be a concise questionnaire. So talking with the Land Use Plan Committee, we decided to focus on 3 key survey themes. And those were outdoor recreation activities, attitudes towards wildlife, and perceptions of land use.
So once we had kind of gotten past laying the foundation for our survey, we still had several queries that we needed to kind of answer before we could go any further. The first one was, what would our mode of survey implementation be? This was something that Mike had already talked about with the Land Use Committee and something we were kind of familiar with just from a previous project last year in Professor Teal's class. What we came up with, and from our literature review, from our education, and from what Mike suggested, was 2 primary modes for consideration. The first one was your run-of-the-mill mail survey, a time-tested mode for survey implementation. Mail surveys carry some cons to them, such as cost of mailing materials and printing, a time sink in terms of data entry. Opening up all those envelopes takes a lot of time, folks. But they have a lot of strengths. You can kind of build a mail survey in however way you want, because you're given a little more leeway in terms of question length and specificity and all that. In addition, mail surveys, like I said, are time tested. People are more used to kind of those surveys. And the way to get information, addresses and what have you, is a little more easier than you would other methods. The other, like I said, we considered 2 modes. The other mode was just a plain online survey. This one would be a little more difficult because unlike just being able to get people's home addresses, we would need to get their email addresses. And there really isn't no kind of tracking system for what email addresses people have across the country. There are other cons to an online survey, such as the possibility of respondents overlooking the survey as spam, and the risk of introducing bias into the survey, because not everyone regularly uses or even has access to computers or smartphones. We also considered a few other modes, not as seriously, but we did talk about them a little bit. We considered a phone survey. That was kind of tossed aside because of cost. We would have to employ a call center and it'd just be way, way out of our budget range. And then we talked about a mixed method survey. So doing something like a mail survey plus a phone survey. That would be absolutely ideal for us because then we would be able to get rid of that non-response bias and also just reach more people. Maybe someone doesn't read their mail, but they'll answer their phone. Unfortunately, again, cost prohibited us from following that path. So we ended up settling on the mail survey as our instrument.
Another big question we had and obstacle to overcome was attaining a stable source of funding. In the beginning, with the Land Use Planning Committee and Mike, we were exploring the option of having towns of Eagle County provide some of the funding. In return, we would increase the sample size for those town areas to likely give them more statistically significant results for those individual towns. Concurrently, we were also seeking funding through a regional partnerships grant. In the end, both of those options kind of fell through, and Mike offered to fund the survey, which is very generous, considering a mailing 3,000 surveys costs around $15,000.
The next step of the logistical questions we had to get answered was how exactly we're going to obtain our sample. So once we knew the mode we wanted to go with and we had the funding nailed down. We really need to figure out where we were going to get a sample to draw 3,000 respondents from. This actually turned out to be extremely painless because, as John mentioned it before, District Wildlife Manager Devin Duval, a member of the roundtable, was able to procure for us the Eagle County voter roll, which is all the information we need, from names and addresses to secondary addresses to third addresses. So we felt we were pretty settled when it came to having our sample. From the Eagle County voter roll has about 30,000 registered voters on it. From that, we were able to pull a sample of 3,000 people randomly generated.
So this also brought up the question, as Ryan mentioned previously, about a third of Eagle County identifies as Hispanic or Latino. 7% of those people identify as not speaking English well, and Spanish being their primary language. So we also wanted to make sure that we reached those people and decided to translate the survey into Spanish. I majored in Spanish, and I also lived in South America for about 11 months. So I began to start translating the survey into Spanish, along with working with Oliver, who's a community conservation coordinator with the Eagle Valley Land Trust. And through him, we worked with a native Spanish speaker in Eagle County to make sure that the language matched up with the English version. However, we realized, and luckily there are many people in the roundtable are living locally in Eagle County, and they brought up the point that a lot of people depend on small PO boxes for their mail. By also including a printed Spanish version, it'd be too large to fit into those PO boxes, and it would push our budget a little bit too far out of our range. So we ended up settling on still offering the Spanish version online, and on the cover letter of the Spanish, directing them how to get to that Spanish version, but we did not offer it with a paper copy any longer.
So, remember about 2 slides ago when I said that we would really love to do a mixed method mail phone survey, but we just couldn't because of the cost? In late August, the Eagle County Commissioners came to the Land Use Committee with a unique opportunity. They found some funding for a phone survey, which is great because that's what we want. We want to eliminate as much bias as possible. We want to reach as many people as possible. So we worked alongside a consultant that Eagle County had worked with previously on other phone surveys, as well as the Land Use Committee, to take our mail survey and turn it into a phone survey. It's not as easy as it sounds. Like I said before, mail surveys give you a lot of flexibility in what you can write and what you can direct respondents to do in the survey. Unfortunately, the ideal phone survey time is about 8 to 12 minutes. So a lot of our content did have to get cut. We worked, like I said, with Bill, the consultant, and the Land Use Committee to identify the most crucial questions we had in our survey. And then we had either pared them down or kept them as is for this phone survey. So we use, like I said before, we used the voter roll for our sample, which also was going to be used for the phone survey as well. However, because, like I said, the cost and the time consumption of a phone survey, they're only able to do about 300 folks for respondents. However, Eagle County actually had in their budget to include an additional 150 non-respondents from the mail survey, which was great for us because that ends up eliminating a bit of that non-response bias that I had touched on before.
So by now there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of different people involved with this mixed methods approach. And so to just give an overview, so basically from February to August, we worked with Mike and the Land Use Planning Committee to really develop that questionnaire. In early September, we sent out that first wave of mail-in surveys. As research shows, to increase your response rate, it's really important to provide at least 4 to 5 touch points with your sample and who you want to respond. So we also sent out reminders and thank you postcards to respond to the survey. We'll send the final reminder in mid-November, and last week the phone survey was fielded. So we will be excited to see those results and process those. It should be noted too that we had an online comment form that is still open through mid-November for people who were not selected in our sample, but still want to provide input regarding wildlife habitat, land use, and outdoor recreation in Eagle County. Also, the Eagle Valley Land Trust has tabled a few in-person events to try to reach the Spanish-speaking population in Eagle County, and those were fielded in September and early October, handing out Spanish surveys, but that is a slightly separate sample than our mail-in surveys.
Okay. So even though the survey is still ongoing, as John just pointed out, we are starting to get responses back. Not only the mail responses, but we had a good amount of people respond using the online link as well, 250 folks to be precise. So these are just a few of the numbers we've gotten back so far. They're increasing, I wouldn't say every day, but they are increasing. So we're just going to look at a few of the key questions from our survey and just kind of the responses we've gotten so far, and maybe hypothesize a little bit about what this could mean. John?
One of the first questions we asked was, which of the following environmental issues you are most concerned about today? Please check your top 3 issues. We can see that almost 20% of respondents said that climate change, wildfires, and drought and low water levels were of their top 3 concerns. I think this really highlights just the pressing issues of increasing wildfires in the Rocky Mountain West and how climate change really plays a role in all of that. So when making decisions based on land management and the wildlife, I really think it's important to also consider climate change and how that impacts your decisions. We see that next, that at 13% are concerned about loss of habitat for fish and wildlife, and almost 12% are concerned about residential and commercial development. So while research has shown that environmental attitudes are not always a reliable predictor of environmental responsible behaviors, it is important to really gauge a baseline of Eagle County residents about their general environmental attitudes and what they are concerned about.
The next question falls under one of our themes, which was attitude towards wildlife. And it is, which of the following best describes your general attitude about wildlife in Eagle County? Pretty straightforward. As you can see from our results here, the majority of people that have responded so far enjoy wildlife and do not worry about the concerns they may cause. So from this, we could hypothesize that because these folks have a positive attitude towards wildlife, they may also have a positive attitude towards policies or actions that benefit wildlife, because previous research tells us that one of the reasons people form attitudes is to better process information in a complex environment. So people say, you know, I like wildlife, I want them around. Maybe the next time Eagle County commissioners come up with a new regulation regarding wildlife or a new kind of designated wildlife area, these people would be in support of it. Our next question also falls under the theme of attitude towards wildlife. How important to you is that wildlife populations in Eagle County are sustained over time? Again, the overwhelming amount of people, and I apologize for kind of the blurry image here, but the overwhelming amount of people say that it is very important to them. One of the other reasons that we measure attitudes towards things is that people use attitudes to maximize rewards and minimize punishments. We could hypothesize from this result that the people who chose very important, who consider sustaining wildlife populations very important, believe that it improves their quality of life in some way, shape, or form to have healthy wildlife populations in Eagle County.
One of the other main survey themes that we addressed in the questionnaire was about outdoor recreation. And working with the roundtable, we really wanted to ask questions about outdoor recreation because of how closely it intersects with wildlife and wildlife habitat, and also land use decisions. Different activities affect wildlife differently. And so it's important to not only learn how often people recreate outside in Eagle County, but also different types of activities that they're participating in. This question asks, how often did you recreate outdoors in Eagle County during the previous 12 months? We see that almost 50% said more than 4 times per week. I wish I had that much time to go hiking. And then another 40% said 2 to 4 times per week. So we know that people in Eagle County are recreating outside very frequently. It's also important to learn how they are recreating. So we also asked, which of the following activities do you enjoy in Eagle County? Please check all that apply. And this survey question came from previous Colorado Parks and Wildlife survey and was revised with roundtable input. We're still processing the results, but we are noticing that many respondents are checking multiple activities. Oftentimes, they're checking the majority of activities. So we're learning that people who recreate outside in Eagle County recreate in diverse ways and multiple ways. And that's really important in land use planning because there's going to be a need for balancing the interests of different types of outdoor recreation users. Activities that are coming up consistently are skiing and hiking and walking/dog walking. Skiing really makes sense with how many ski resorts there are in Eagle County.
This next question falls under a theme of land use preferences, and it asks, oops, let's see the question, but it just asks people if they agree with any of these following statements. These statements were pulled from multiple of the different literatures that we read throughout our literature review. And we asked this question because we wanted to gauge how people view open land in Eagle County. So this would be really important to decision makers to understand why exactly people are going out and enjoying the open spaces they're providing for the citizenry. As you can see, a lot of them strongly agree with the reasons we provided, with somewhat degree coming up second place. But very little people are disagreeing with any of the reasons we provided of why they go out and enjoy the open spaces of Eagle County. This last question was one of our really important ones because we asked people to weigh the three different types of kind of land uses against each other: wildlife habitat, outdoor recreation opportunities, and development. For the purposes of this question, please consider outdoor recreation activities such as like creating places for people to hike and ski separate from land development, which we would consider like farming or urban development of any kind. So the percentages you have here are the combination of people who agree or fully agree or somewhat agree with the statement. So for wildlife habitat, for example, this one on the far right, we asked, do you prefer wildlife habitat over development projects, or do you prefer wildlife habitat over more outdoor recreation opportunities? As you can see, the people who want more wildlife habitat over development projects or outdoor recs, like majority of them all agreed with that statement. And we look over at development projects though, when asked if people prefer more development over wildlife habitat or more development over outdoor rec opportunities, the majority of them do not agree with that statement. In fact, most of them strongly disagree from the results we have so far. We also provided a balanced option where we asked people if, to the extent possible, if you would prefer decision makers find ways to balance all three of those land uses. And again, 65% of people agreed, which actually was kind of lower than we expected. We thought more people would select agree overall when it comes to balancing the three different types of land uses. And I don't remember if I mentioned this in the beginning, but I will say this now. These results that we've showed you so far come from our online portion of the survey. So like John mentioned before, when people get the mail survey, they have a link to a Qualtrics survey, which they can go on and do. That was just the easiest we could pull for results at the moment. Once we get farther into analyzing the results from the mail surveys, from the comment forums, et cetera, these numbers could drastically change. We hypothesize that they probably won't change too much, but could be a surprise.
So we learned a lot through this experience and working with Mike and also the roundtable. What did we learn designing and implementing the survey? Here are just a few key takeaways.
Yeah, so the first thing we learned was how to conduct robust research methods. This was something we kind of touched on last year in a few of our classes, but with Mike, it really hit home. Like I said before, he's a very experienced social scientist. So he made sure, that every decision we were making in this process, every design, every question we made, every kind of weighing which mode we should use was backed by previous research. And that's really important because when we write our technical report, we want to make sure that people understand why we made these decisions, where they're coming from, and if they're based in previous science. The second thing we learned was that semantics matter. Before I mentioned that the mail survey kind of gives you a little leeway to write what you want to write and guide people the way you want to guide them. However, it's super important when you are making those mail surveys, those questions, that you structure them that are not too simple, but also not too complex. You want to structure them in just the right way where someone can look at it be able to discern the answer that they want to answer to that question, and then it gives you the data that you need. And this applies again to the phone survey. Like I said before, we really need to pare down a lot of those questions because a phone survey, ideally 8 to 12 minutes, it's not a lot of time to be asking super long questions. There's not a lot of time to ask people to weigh, wildlife habitat versus development versus outdoor recreation opportunities. So going through and making sure that everything is clear, concise, and that we're going to get the results that we hope to get from them is extremely, extremely important to this whole process. A third thing we learned was that a survey cannot be everything. You may remember from the very beginning, our initial kind of literature review identified 7 themes we would like to build the survey around. And eventually we had to cut out 4 of those themes to only be 3 major themes. That's because we can't send out people a 50-page survey. People aren't going to want to do that because that would cost so much money. So we have to cut down on a lot of stuff. And that requires a lot of communication between our team, but also with the land use committee to make sure that the stuff we're cutting or the stuff we're adding aligns with the objectives and what they want in terms of deliverables. The final thing we learned was to avoid our frustration and check our expectations, because several times throughout this project, we hit bumps in the road, let's say. Anything from broken printers to sudden deadlines. These things happen in any project. You can't avoid them. The only thing you can do is just remain adaptable and continue on. And this was probably the most important lesson we learned from all of this, because this was the first time John and I had worked with a collaborative of this scale. And there's a lot of input, there's a lot of voices, there's a lot of needs and wants that people are looking at this project for. So, like I said, this is probably the most important one, because you can't get mad at the people you're working with. You can't be frustrated if they say something that you don't agree with or anything like that. You just have to work with them and try to reach a compromise. And throughout this whole process, I think we hit that mark perfectly.
Yeah, we learned a lot of that in theory in our classes and everything. And it wasn't until really working with such a large collaborative and Mike really learning how to implement that professionally. Another key takeaway when we're designing and implementing this survey was the importance of having adaptive systematic planning when it comes to the more partners you worked with, especially in socio-ecological work. So in our project, it was kind of helpful to kind of have a planning framework like the Conservation Measures Partnership Open Standards. We were lucky enough to come into this survey development towards when we were defining the team and the vision for this survey, and identifying threats to wildlife, and also just kind of understanding how to go about this in a systematic way. We then developed kind of our strategies and objectives for this survey and created a plan to implement it. And we're currently in that stage 4, analyze, use, and adapt to the capture and share learning. So we're still analyzing the results and understanding how they will be a useful learning tool for the roundtable and decision makers in Eagle County. And we're really excited to start to learn and share some of that learning with everyone. I think it's also important to note that it's really important to collaborate with social scientists at the start. And Mike and some other professors at CSU have written a really good paper highlighting this, because if you involve social scientists at the start, you can just avoid a lot of problems that happen later on. It also strengthens the overall effort of the conservation planning and makes it more holistic. So yeah, I'd recommend reading that paper if you have the time. Mm-hmm. And so we also learned working with this collaborative and Mike that working from shared optimism and trust really leads to positive action, and positive action that usually lasts longer and is more long-term. It was really a privilege to work with everyone on the roundtable and the Land Use Plan Committee who volunteer their time and have their own professional schedules. You just really tell during the meetings that people want the best for not only the wildlife in Eagle County, but also for the people. And they're really starting to balance and create that interdisciplinary approach of combining social sciences with the ecological sciences. That being said, everyone does have their own professional schedules. So you really need to plan further in advance than you normally would. Everyone volunteers their time, and with multiple meetings happening every month, the start dates and the end dates, you need to really plan those out a lot more than you would normally think. Brian and I also noticed during the meetings we're able to attend that when the shared vision and the goals were restated, we just noted a sense of increased focus and kind of momentum. During this project, there were a lot of ebbs and flows of the momentum and when things were happening, and you kind of just have to ride the waves, and when things are really carrying that momentum, try to carry the project as far as you can.
So we do have a few recommendations for the roundtable that we came up with, and we will present it to them when we finish our final report for them. And this just comes from outside observers who, again, have no experience in this world. But from what we could see, as the roundtable becomes more established, consider a more formalized structure. So as John touched on before, they do have an action plan, but they don't really have any governing documents. This roundtable is very, very new. Like I said, it was founded in February 2020. So there's still a lot of kind of like growing and trying out new things that they're doing. And it works right now, the structure that they have. It's flexible. It allows people to step up. It allows a lot of collaboration and people sharing resources. And right now it does seem to be working very well. However, we think that as they become more established in the community and as kind of like a source of scientifically backed information concerning wildlife, that they might want to consider a more formalized structure, maybe having a governing board or just like points of contact on the roundtable of people who specialize in, like, let's say, funding or education or things like that. The second thing is to encourage more communication and collaboration between the sub-communities to avoid a silo effect where it's just the committee to the roundtable instead of like committees and up to the roundtable, sort of like that. Right now, a lot of the conversations between committees do seem to occur during roundtable meetings, which happen once a month, and sometimes they do get skipped over. So you can go 2 or 3 months without having a roundtable meeting, and therefore committees may like not be on the same page. And in that case, you lose a lot of valuable information and resources that a committee may need at the time. So right now, like we said earlier, facilitation is done through the National Forest Foundation, but this really ties back to the first point about having a more formalized structure. If you have a more formalized kind of communication net, then possibly communication between the committees would be a little stronger. The last one is to improve the social media presence of the roundtable itself. At the moment, they do have a website, but it is hosted by an organization called the Walker Mountain Nature Center. And it is kind of bare bones and a little bit buggy. We would suggest that the roundtable either ask someone within the collaborative to see if any of these organizations have someone who could help them build and design a website, a functioning website, or to seek funds to hire a website designer. Because in this day and age where everyone's on their phones and everyone's on their computers all the time, it's really important that you be able to broadcast what you're doing, what you're about to the public, especially in Eagle County. And the other half of that is having some sort of, like it says here, social media presence. There's no Facebook page or Instagram page for the Eagle County Wildlife Roundtable. It's not something that is crucial to an organization like this, but just having their name on those platforms would help a lot in terms of reaching people when you go on Facebook and you search for this kind of organization. It'll also be a good way for the public to be able to reach the roundtable itself, because the roundtable is a way for the community to let their concerns about wildlife be known. And what better way to do that than by a Facebook group? So, so where do we go from here? As John pointed out before, we are still receiving results. We just had the phone survey happen last week. We still have to send out some postcard reminders. So the first thing we have to complete is finish analyzing all the results from this survey. The survey itself will close in a couple of weeks, about mid-November. And at that point, we should have all the responses that we need, but we are actively analyzing them as we go along. The second thing is to produce a technical report in collaboration with Mike and published in CPW's technical report series. This is something we're also actively working on. We have actually a pretty good rough draft, in my opinion, already done. It's missing, obviously, these sections where we analyze results and what have you, but it is in the works, and we hope that it will be published soon after we're done with the project. And the last thing is the presentation of our findings to the Land Use Committee or the Eagle County Roundtable. And this will happen at the tail end of the project, and it will kind of look like this, but it'll probably be more focused on, showing them the results, kind of like what I was showing with the preliminary results, but having like the full picture of what we got back. They'll of course have the technical report handy, but it's always better to kind of come to them physically and be like, hey guys, like this is what we found from, this is what we got from this survey.
We really just want to thank some people, and Ryan, would you like to start off?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the first people we'd like to acknowledge and thank for all their time and effort is the Eagle County Roundtable, and especially everyone on the Land Use Committee. It's been such a great time working with all these different professionals from all different aspects of life. Some of them not even from like a conservation or environmental background, but all input extremely valuable and extremely enlightening. Like John mentioned earlier, it's really inspiring to see like this huge group of folks, over 50 people, volunteer their time to this effort. It really shows how important wildlife is in Eagle County.
We'd also like to thank Brett and Dawson for finding and providing such great capstone project opportunities, and also to all the CLTL professors who have shown their continuous support with us and really establishing a lot of what we learned in this capstone project in the classroom. And of course, thank you, Mike Ortuge, for always being the steadfast advisor and project partner for Ryan and I. I think anyone who has the privilege to work with Mike can immediately tell he has a commitment to creating quality research. And that he also shows his depth of experience and professionalism when working with people from all different backgrounds. So we really enjoyed working together, and really, yeah, we're grateful.
Yeah,
so,
thanks, Mike. It's been great.
Yeah, now we have time for some questions.
Great. So thanks to the two of you for a great presentation. What we'll do, as I mentioned at the top, is open it up to Q&A to those in the room, and to the folks on Zoom. Again, just put it into the chat and I will keep an eye on that and bring those to John. Looks like there's already one there from Kim, which I'll also, as I scrolled through to see who had joined us, to kind of echo what you had to say, is thank you to the Roundtable for creating the opportunity for our students to have the experience. It's a depth of learning that we can't possibly replicate by just keeping things in the classroom. So thanks to everyone on the Roundtable, and a number of you. It's good to virtually see you or see your names. There's some familiar names there that I haven't crossed paths with for a long time. So it looks like Kim has a question for you. Would you be willing to make a presentation open to the public and local policymakers at Colorado Mountain College and the Edwards campus sometime in the spring? Policy recommendations would be helpful. That's it. Easy, straightforward question, not too intellectually difficult.
Sorry, Kim, but we actually graduate in December. But we will give our presentation that we end up giving to Eagle, or presenting to Eagle County Roundtable. We can give that to them, and if they want to make it like provide it to other folks. They have done presentations in the past to just explain what the Roundtable is to certain communities throughout the county. And if they wanted to do something similar with the presentation we provide for them, then they are more than welcome to.
I may not let Ryan entirely off the hook because he's going to work for us for a few months. And you can zoom him into that campus.
I guess it's in my job.
I'll have a question, which is, so what, just kind of informally, as you've been interacting with the Roundtable, you present them some results, we kind of get them to a point that you're feeling confident that these are the results, these are our definite conclusions. Then what potentially happens with that? Where does that influence something?
I think this is, really comes into how interactive the Roundtable wants to be with the community at large. We didn't mention this earlier, but the data will be shared with the county and vice versa with the Roundtable. So it'll be accessible for everyone to see and kind of learn from. And I think it's really up to the Roundtable how much they want to integrate what we are learning from the survey results into decisions with the community. And
yeah, pretty much that.
Thank
you. Wonderful presentation, both of you. So you mentioned the communications amongst the Roundtable and the committees and all that good stuff. But how did you find your own personal communication with so many different people and groups and everything happening?
John, maybe restate it because I don't know kind of how well that mic picks up from that end of the room.
Yeah.
So would you restate the question for everyone else?
Yeah, Molly asked, Could you repeat one more time? Thanks.
You went into the communications between the committees themselves and how they can improve it, but how did you find your own personal communications with so many different people throughout your entire project?
Okay, so she's basically asking how did we find our personal communications with everyone on the roundtable and with so many different people on the roundtable and land use plan committee? How did we kind of find that and make it work?
So we did not have a lot of communication with the majority of the roundtable. Most of our communication was through the land use committee, which has about 7 or 8 members on it. That's the body we work with the most. That's like the meetings we went to regularly. We did sit in on a couple of roundtable meetings just to like get the experience and just hear what other people were doing, which was really great educational opportunity. In terms of communicating with the land use committee is actually pretty easy. The facilitators from the National Forest Foundation do a pretty excellent job, in my opinion. Anytime we had to communicate to the committee as a whole, we could just email one of them and then they would forward that email to whoever needed to see it. We also had Mike help us a ton, as a professional in this world for quite some time. He was always there to kind of give us advice on how to reach out to people and how to word specific questions or concerns that we had.
I would also add in that this is kind of one of those times where COVID has positives and negatives in that we were pretty much primarily just virtual. However, that led to really easy access through Zoom or emails and just kind of led to a shared sense of just frequent communication through those modes. That being said, I know that there are potential planning to meet back in person. And I think that has its positives too. When you get to collaborate with close to 50 people and you get to feel the energy of everyone meeting together, I mean, I think that definitely has its place too. So
guys, you did phenomenal. I have a million questions. I'm not gonna, I'll spare everybody that, but I think first, thank you to both of you. Like I can say that on behalf of CPW, the roundtable, the land use planning committee, because all the methods, like all the things that we did to try to hear, like the point of integrating social science, to hear from people and genuinely incorporate their perceptions and values into things. None of that's possible if we don't have John and Ryan working on this project. It's just not. Like a Spanish translated survey, that's really difficult. Agencies are working on increasing that capacity. The online survey, the mail, all of this stuff, it's really important in natural resource collaborations, but it's not always feasible, right? There are challenges, like you said, John. I drew like a squiggly line of ebbs and flows. That's a lot of what this project was. And so one of the things, super proud, when you said surveys can't be all things, all people, we can talk about that later. That was amazing. It can't be. But in general, just a comment, like collaborative natural resource management, when done well, is interdisciplinary, when done effectively, but it requires characteristics of people. And I think John and Ryan had them and exhibited them and kind of showed them well, which is flexibility. Like students in a master's capstone have timelines. Like it's very real timelines that things have to get done. They were very flexible, active learning, empathy, like I just jotted down professionalism. And then to your point at the end, keeping the goal top of mind. When there are ebbs and flows, I think both of you did that really well. Like the end goal of this, we all want the same thing. Everybody wanted the same thing. We want really good results. We want a really useful effort. So kudos to both of you for having those characteristics. And I wonder how, for myself, like what recommendations you have moving forward. What advice would you give me in the roundtable? Like if other students are going to be brought on, what could have helped things? What helped you overcome them? And how do I get these characteristics? Because you both are fantastic.
I think one thing to just continue to do is just really having that inclusive, like welcoming attitude. Ryan and I just felt that from the get-go, not only from you, Mike, but everyone on the land use plan committee and the roundtable. We just immediately felt like we were included in the discussions and, we're part of the process, so I would make sure to keep emphasizing that with anyone who's new, whether it be students or just new members.
Yeah, for sure. The considerations for like our project and our timeline was just like amazing in the decision making. Like every time like something came up in this process, someone, and it wasn't always the same person, but someone was always like, oh, like, does this work for your timetable for your project? And that was just like, it was great to just feel that kind of support.
Great, thanks.
How specific is your survey for Eagle County? I thought it was really interesting how, like, one of the factoids you said was you couldn't put a really bulky survey into, you know, the mailboxes, but did you have to cut a lot of questions to make it for Eagle County? Could you do it for another county in Colorado if you had the time and funding to do it?
That's a really good question. In terms of our geography and our scale, we made sure to stay consistent when asking questions that it was in Eagle County. That being said, I think you could easily, with most of the questions, replace it with somewhere else. And yeah, apply that to different counties. Yeah.
There's definitely a lot. I mean, the surge of activity going on, especially in our mountain communities, to figure out how to have it all or how to accommodate a lot of it and which trade-offs are acceptable. I mean, this type of stuff you're doing has implications for a lot of regions in Colorado. They're putting more and more effort into trying to figure that out. And it's, you know, amplified by COVID and all the increase of use in public lands. That infrastructure has kind of been in place to these kind of round table collaborative types of groups. But I just feel like the importance of their work, as they recognize, is just got increased by some great magnitude. So I think what you're doing is, it could be really looked at by a number of these other groups that exist in other parts of the state.
For sure. And Brett, just to your point earlier, like one of the things the group is doing is they're revising land use regulations. That's coming. Like counties do this somewhat regularly. And when it comes, they wanted to have data to say, no, like before we do this, before we plan for this, this is what people want and what they need. And I think to your point, Katie, like this questionnaire, because they did a good job with the lit review, it's theoretically based, it's really well informed. It could translate into any county now, legitimately, which is why it's such a value to have this. I mean, this is a deliverable for the roundtable and CPW to have this questionnaire. It's huge.
Yeah, our technical report is going to be jam-packed with a lot of citations and information. So people can like look at that and be like, oh, I wonder if this works, and hopefully it does.
That's really cool.
Thanks, Gabe.
I actually have one kind of actually very closely related to that question, which is that, so based on the preliminary results you're showing, it seems like, you know, we take away that a lot of people in Eagle County are agreeing with, you know, they highly value wildlife, perhaps to a degree that maybe I wouldn't have expected. However, for decision makers, I'm wondering how you might plan to put that into context. I think like a cross-county comparison or something like that would be really interesting. But I'm just curious as to what kind of ideas maybe you all have around that.
Yeah. So it's hard to say, honestly. This roundtable is actually pretty lucky in that county commissioners are very active. I've seen a few come to the meetings and what have you. So they very much care about how people feel about wildlife and extension wildlife habitat. Eagle County, though, as I showed earlier in terms of geography, is like super, maybe not like super unique in Colorado, but it is very unique in that so much of the land belongs to the federal government, and only a tiny bit is actually managed by the county. So it's hard to compare, let's say, Eagle County's like open space, they have an open space department, how they will take this data and use it, than Larimer County, which has natural areas all over the place. And the decisions they make are just completely different than what Eagle County would make because they have that kind of like, I won't say surplus, but they have like all that land.
I think you bring up a good point too, that there is room for comparison here too. Other professors like Tara Teal have done other surveys based around wildlife values and attitudes. And there is other information that we could compare results with at a county level, but also maybe eventually at different levels too.
All right. Well, I see lots of positive comments, so be sure you scroll through the chat at the end of all this to see the accolades that they're being shared to the two of you. So it looks like that might be a wrap.
Awesome.
So for those of you on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us, especially for all of those that are representing the roundtable to kind of hear what some of these preliminary results are and give our students the reassurance that what they are doing matters because you're here to listen to it. So we appreciate that. And for those of you that are joining for good moral support of your colleagues, peers, family members, whatever role these guys have in your lives, thank you for being here to provide that support. And I think I think that's a wrap.
Awesome.
So good job. Everyone,
Thanks,
have a good
everyone.
afternoon and a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Doug.